There's people out there that have things that are not valuable on resumes, but are incredibly cool. And a real example I give is like beekeeping. We have an employee who's like nuts about beekeeping. And I hired them partially because their DM to me was like, I love bees. And it was all about bees. And I don't think that gets you very far when applying to big tech maybe. But for us, what it just shows is that level of obsession, because that can be put onto anything usually.
You just heard from Isaiah Granet, the co-founder and CEO of Bland. And hiring someone because they're deeply passionate about beekeeping pretty much tells you everything you need to know about how this company thinks about sourcing talent. Bland is building voice AI infrastructure that allows companies to automate and scale real-time phone conversations. And they went from pre-seed to Series B in just 10 months, so they've had to learn how to build and hire in hypergrowth. And instead of pulling from the typical Stanford to startup pipeline, Isaiah and his team are doing the opposite. They're looking for intensity, curiosity, and obsession in places that most employers would overlook. In this episode, we talk about hiring people with non-traditional backgrounds, sourcing candidates from cold inbound and unlikely places, and why passion often matters more than pedigree. I'm your host, Isabelle Johannessen. You're listening to Build Mode, and this season is all about building a world-class team. I want to remind all the Build Mode listeners that applications for the startup battlefield are now open. So if you're building an early-stage company or have an MVP, apply for the program at techcrunch.com/apply. And if you want to take these conversations into the real world, then be sure to join us for TechCrunch Disrupt, happening October 13 to 15 in San Francisco. Tickets are on sale now at techcrunch.com/events. And be sure to use code BuildMode15 for 15% off all ticket types. We can't wait to see you there. All right, that's enough from me. Let's get into my very flavorful conversation with Bland. Hi, Isaiah. How are you doing today?
I am doing good. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you on Build Mode. To kick things off, I would love it if you could just give us an intro of yourself and what Bland does.
Yeah, my name's Isaiah. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Bland. What we do is voice AI for the world's largest companies. So think Fortune 10 financial institutions, companies like Gallup, Samsara, really the world's largest companies doing phone calls, interacting with their customers. We automate that with AI, and our mission is to not only automate those calls, but actually make them incredibly pleasant and not frustrating.
Oof, that's a big mission. And give me a little bit of the origin story. How did you come up with this idea?
That's a long question. So actually, we were a health tech company originally. So we started in 2023 as a prior authorization startup. So we were working with doctors' offices unrelated to voice AI to file appeals against insurance. And we raised a little bit of angel money. And because it was a really bad idea, we managed to get into YC. And but we were accepted to YC. About 3/4 of the way through YC, we just realized this is not working. And so we were playing around with a bunch of different ideas, and I got really excited by some of the stuff that you could do with like OpenAI at the time and how could you make AI speak. And we ended up building a first version of Bland, had like 5 seconds of latency, really terrible. We went to demo day with it, got rejected by like 180 investors over 3 weeks. And then from there, me and my co-founder put our heads down, had to find a couple of weird people to join us, and we managed to go from pre-seed to Series B in 2024, so in about 10 months. And then in 2025, we've seen some really good acceleration and are about 70 people now.
Wow. Okay, that was a lot to unpack. Okay, let's go back a little bit. So, I mean, first of all, seed to Series B in 10 months.
Pre-seed, but who's counting?
We're counting, apparently. That's insane. So tell me about that journey. How did that happen?
Yeah, so we were essentially very early to the market for voice AI. It was really well before people were thinking about this. In fact, the number one rejection we would get from VCs was, we don't think people will be doing a phone call a year from now. They said it was all going to be text-based. Now, thankfully, they were wrong. And the number one issue that we saw, though, this early on in voice was latency. It was how long does the AI take to reply to you? And so we put all of our time towards solving this problem of latency. And we had a really big breakthrough. And in January of 2024, we did this viral video where you can see me talking to a phone on a table, and we're clocking the time, and the AI is replying in 400 milliseconds. Now, with GPT real-time, some of the other stuff that might not sound impressive, but at the time, like the standard was 3 seconds was considered really fast. And so this was a very big deal, got us a ton of attention, a lot of early traction, and we were able to raise our seed round, and then we were able to raise our Series A about 4 months later from Scale Ventures. And that was on the back of a big, sort of tailwinds of growth. And then about 4 months after that, we had our Series B from Emergence.
Wow. I mean, that is some serious rapid growth. I'm curious as the founder or the CEO as well, right? How did you manage that quick of growth? I mean, in terms of both hiring, but I mean, even, establishing the infrastructure to be able to grow that quickly.
Yeah, I think manage is the wrong word. I'd say survive. And the truth is if you're privileged enough to experience that kind of growth, your job is to figure out what fires you can let burn and what you can't. And so the truth is like for the first year, it's a joke, not a terribly funny one, but among the early guys that like payroll never ran on time. And it wasn't because we didn't have the money. It was because all of our focus was on grow, grow, grow. And so a lot of things at Bland that were fixed in 2025 were really simple problems that we created in 2024 because our job wasn't to be hyper structured. It was to focus on how do we get more contracts with enterprise customers? How do we get more brand recognition? How do we keep building great product?
Were there any of those fires or sort of small problems that you ended up fixing in 2025 that were more difficult to fix that you wish you could have, been more proactive in 2024 with?
Absolutely. Something that is not talked about nearly enough is making sure that your employee equity grants are set up correctly. And this is something that you can't undo, especially if you're a really fast growth company. And one of the things that I recommend to every founder is take a couple of hours, sit down with a corporate lawyer and make sure you have all of your ducks in a row. We had YC help us do a great job getting the starting point. But as you're growing, you don't think about options and strike prices and making sure that people are positioned for success. And ultimately, the frustrating thing is that if you're not thinking about this in the moment, you can accidentally cause your employees to miss out on benefits that you want them to get.
Did you feel this pain from your employees, or is it just you realizing it later on? Or
realizing later on that there was a lot of stuff that we could have done to potentially make sure that on tax implications and some of the other things that they were taken care of in a better way. I think it's the job of any founder to take care of his early employees. I mean, all employees for sure, but especially the people that are making the highest risk reward sacrifice. You should be doing everything you can early days to make sure you're looking out for them financially, emotionally. It is really your job to take care of the whole person. And a big philosophy we have at Bland is we don't say we're a family, we're a team, but it's my job to look at everybody as family. And it's my job to say, how can I take care of this person, not just as an employee, but as a human being? And that extends to saying they have family, they have kids, they have other things they care about. And I should be enabling that and helping them enjoy that and not taking away.
I'm very glad to hear that, and I couldn't agree more. I'm curious, though, how did you sort of retroactively compensate for that mistake that's hard to fix?
Lots of money. No, really, it was just a lot of hours with lawyers. It was going back, reviewing documents, making sure that they had access to the right resources, and learning myself, too. And I think for a lot of early stage founders, your job is really not to think about these things. But there's a couple of moments where if you just pause, you ask a couple of the questions, sit down, you can make sure that you're setting people up. Things I don't advise doing, really complicated compensation plans, anything that has to do with really in-depth benefits or other pieces, you should make sure that you're covering the things that matter for your employees, but don't get bogged down in trying to build a perfect system. Your job is to make sure their basic needs are covered and that you're giving them great upside.
But so, I mean, with all this money and, I'm sure as an early stage founder, there's a million things you need to think about, especially in a hyper-growth phase. What about bringing on HR consultants or expanding your HR team or having, bringing people on board who can take that off of your plate? Because I can completely empathize that it shouldn't be all on your plate.
Yes. Yeah. A learning right now is like we're looking for a chief people officer. And so we don't have anybody that does HR at the company right now, which is really difficult. We've been able to set up some good systems that have scaled really well. But my advice is it's the founder's job to sell, to recruit, and to set the culture. And when you think about HR, especially early on, as a founder, you can't outsource the culture. Your job is to figure out what happens in the rooms that you're not in. What are people saying? How are they thinking? What are they feeling? And to me, I think a great piece of advice I got was culture is what you call out and what you don't call out. And so when somebody does something, culture is not a written document. It's your job to actually say, actually, that's not what we do here, or this is awesome, that is what we do here. And having an HR person early on, I think, can be destructive in the sense that you don't want to outsource that job.
Totally. What you can outsource, though, is payroll.
Yes, you can absolutely outsource payroll. I wish we had done that.
What did your employees say? I mean, were they on board with this? Like, we're growing so fast, you can't get paid this month, so sorry. Or were they pushing back a little bit? Or
No, I mean, look, it was not intentional. And like we worked hard to get to the point where we could do it. But it was more things like taxes would get in the way. And then We were using a payroll provider that if you didn't have your taxes set up correctly, it would get blocked. And so a lot of it was just communicating really clearly, like, hey guys, I chose to focus on this deal instead of unblock XYZ thing. And I'm going to make sure that this is taken care of. We're going to get it done right. But I want you to have the clarity, and also making sure is like you understand the situation that your employee's in and you're close enough to be able to say, hey, I know the impact that my actions are having or could have on this person. And the people that we had at this stage were young, they were scrappy, and they were on board to say, let's just focus on getting done what we need to, and we'll put out the fires as we have to.
So let's talk about some of these very understanding employees that you had at that time. So I have been tipped off by a little birdie that you have some very interesting sort of talent pools that you've tapped into, from everything from, philosophy majors that end up being, engineering leads, or former Taco Bell employees, or just having no work experience needed on your job descriptions. Tell me, what is this hiring philosophy?
We're really, really weird at Bland, and I mean that in the most endearing sense. And what we look for is people that care. And so coming out of like YC, when you didn't have any investors, which was us, we didn't have any real traction, which was us. You have to get creative. You can't go out and find the sort of talent pool that you might traditionally associate with tech startups like a Stanford grad. Although there are some that would be excited by that, it's just harder to identify. You kind of have to go out and hunt the right person. And we were searching for a really long time for our founding engineer. The person that we ended up hiring, his work experience was a few months at an insurance company in Iowa. And before that, he had been a manager at a Taco Bell, and before that on a factory floor. And we found him through his GitHub because he had built a version of a voice AI agent, and it was to answer support tickets. We reached out to him, and we talked to him. And the thing that got me was not his technicals. We didn't put him through a technical interview of any kind. It was, we asked him, like, what do you do for fun? And I have never seen a grin as big as on his face that broke out, and he said, I like to ship code. And you can't fake that kind of intensity and passion for what you do. And, that translated to our second hire, which was a marketing hire. He was a dropout from the University of Arizona who had worked with some YouTube creators and was sort of finding his own thing. But what stood out about Mike, our marketing hire, was he cared about his craft. And you could tell that he didn't just do marketing as a job. He did it because he had true excitement about the thing he was doing every single day. And I think that's why a big question I ask everybody is, tell me about what gets you excited. I don't care if it's beekeeping. I don't care if it's work. In fact, work is probably like not the thing that gets you the most excited unless you're really, really nutty. But like, I want to know that you light up about something. And if somebody lights up, that's a great hire, because there's a lot of people out there that are pretty flat that don't have ambition or intensity. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, but it's not who you want building your startup.
I love that. I think that's a really interesting take on hiring, because especially in Silicon Valley. Are you from here?
I'm from San Diego, so close enough.
Close enough.
Yeah.
But having worked here for a while, like there's a type. There's absolutely a type of founder, of employee, and it is hard for people who don't fit that mold to succeed here. And I think it's fantastic that you're sort of looking outside of the traditional pools. I am curious where you find the talent. I mean, you can't always source from GitHub, and you can't always source from Taco Bell, or what is sort of your like go-to hiring?
You'd be shocked. There's a lot more people on GitHub than you think. No, what we like to do is look for people that reach out. So I think 25% of Bland actually is from cold inbound, meaning somebody that sent me a cold email asking an interview. We recently hired a Duke graduate who he basically sent an email saying, hey, I'd love to interview at Bland. I think it's a cool company. I forwarded him off to my chief business officer, Noah, who is a philosophy major who had no background in anything tech. And we interviewed Hayden, our new hire. And what just showed was like he loved to ship, and he was just like, I want to build things. And so we said, honestly, we don't know where we're going to fit you in the org, but here's a job offer. Come be here. And now he's 2 months in, and the company like has a very large set of things that depend on him. And so just looking for these people, it's like, if you care enough to send a cold email, if you care enough to do these things, and it's, again, not a knock on the people that have offers coming to them, but working in a startup's really hard. And your job isn't to find the most prestigious people. It's the job to find the people that will get you to the next level. And oftentimes, especially in today's world with today's tooling, finding people that are just tenacious, high effort, high intelligence, and willing to work hard does a great job. The big thing I like to do too is LinkedIn posts. So just being really upfront saying, hey, this is who we're looking for. A recent post I did was, we're hiring for philosophy majors, because we looked at our company and we realized the top performing people that we've hired were actually philosophy majors on average. And so just finding unique people that are smart, that care, and are willing to try something new.
Why do you think philosophy majors are doing so well in your environment?
Something AI prompting. I don't know, but I think probably because they know how to think. And it's really hard to teach somebody how to think. It's much easier to teach someone who knows how to think, who knows how to solve problems, how to use HubSpot or Stripe.
Yeah, I can understand that. I guess I would wonder, if you have all these people with inbound, I completely understand hiring people who are passionate, enthusiastic about what you're building and show interest. But hiring for roles that haven't been defined yet or not necessarily needed or finding ways to fit them in, how do you make sure that you are growing in a, scalable and sustainable way?
It's bad startup advice to hire before you need someone, but it's good startup advice to hire when you find someone exceptional. And so we're not saying we'll just hire someone who's middle of the road. You have to show up and really blow us away. And for context, for our engineering team, we're only 9 engineers. So it's incredibly small. I am not really involved in the day-to-day of the engineering recruitment process and some of the other pieces anymore. I still help to do top of funnel stuff, but it takes us about 500 unique candidates before we get to one onsite. And the last 7 onsites before this most recent one we did have all been failures, meaning we didn't offer a job. So if you start doing the numbers, the level of competitiveness that we hold, where it's not just like you have to be weird and work at Taco Bell, it's we're looking for the gem of the person who didn't get the shot, and we can give them that opportunity.
Yeah. And so how many people are you in total now?
We're 75 people.
75 people, lordy lord. Okay, and so I know you were talking about how, building culture is very important, especially as the founder. How have you sort of framed that culture, and how have you been able to, or not, I don't know, scale it for these 75 people growing so quickly?
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that I actually did not do very well early days. Meaning when it was 5 people and I could see the people I was working with and I could talk to them and we spent every hour together, it was really easy to do culture. When we got to 10 or 12 people, it started to fall apart a little bit because my expectation of how I could build culture was by being really physically close, working closely with somebody. It makes it a lot easier. And I don't think I was super intentional, especially around our Series A when I was off fundraising, about making sure that those pieces were there. And it's really painful when the culture starts going one way to correct it. It requires a lot of manual intervention, requires you to always be on and sort of set these pillars. And for any early stage startup founder, my biggest advice would be make sure in the hiring culture, in the way that you treat people, in the way that you act as a company, make sure that that continues even when you're not in the room, and really be intentional about it. Because the only thing that scales is culture. Everything else can break. But if you can build your culture right, it will scale immensely. It just takes really careful design, a lot of thought, and willingness to change.
So, wait, 9 engineers, 75 people. What are all the rest of these people doing?
Watching the engineers. No, we have a forward deployed engineering group. Those are people working directly with customers. We have go-to-market. We have our BDRs, so our business development representatives. This is another favorite part of Bland, is that we hire for, a role that's considered pretty junior, entry level. It's very competitive for us. We will go through 20 or 30 candidates before we find somebody we hire, which is, I think, relatively high for the BDR role. We have 11 of them right now, but we actually have promoted 6 BDRs over the last year to different roles. And that's including account executives, but also marketing and forward deployed engineering. And what we found was, again, the principle applied is finding these young people who are ready to work really hard, who are willing to learn how to sell the product, get rejected every single day and put the effort in. You can put them pretty much anywhere in the business and they're going to succeed, even in a technical role.
But what about, in a big tech company, you'd have mentorship and managers who are older and very experienced. So who is teaching these young, inexperienced people how to do many different jobs at this point?
It's gotten harder as we've scaled, but my first thing I do whenever we hire somebody is within the first week or so, I try to get coffee with them and spend 20 minutes just talking to them. And really what I say to them is, I want to know what makes you tick. I want to know what your goals are. I want to know what you need to see from me every day to want to be here for the next 10 years. And I try to get people to communicate those things to me because oftentimes people are really shy. And so making sure that you pay attention to people and you have in your head their goals, it doesn't take a whole lot of effort. People will say, oh, I want to move to a technical role. Okay, great. Now all I need to know is that the next time there's a technical task or something, tap this person and say, why don't you go watch one of the engineers and what they're doing and try and help them out? And giving them the little opportunities to show that you're thinking about them and empowering your leaders, your executives, although less so if you're early stage, it's really you directly, to go do those same things is super important The other thing I tell everybody is I want to hear the ugly thing out loud all the time. I want you to tell me the worst thing that's happening in the organization. I don't really usually need to hear the things that are going well. Tell me the ugly things. But on the flip side, if you don't brag about your achievements, I'm not going to know and the company's not going to know. Being humble is awesome, but also you should celebrate yourself and you should be your own biggest advocate here. And making sure that you tell your early employees and people that you hire, celebrate your wins. And it doesn't matter if it feels a little bit weird. We all want to hear them and we all want to celebrate them.
I think that's really good advice, especially to junior employees. But then, of course, there's some people who that comes more naturally and others that's a bit more like pulling teeth to get them to celebrate themselves. But everyone should celebrate themselves. I'm glad you're, imparting that on your employees. I'm curious when or if you have brought in some more senior executives at this point.
Great piece of advice I got from Michael Seibel. We were talking about this with him is like, how do we hire older people, especially we want to have this young, scrappy culture? And he said, why do you think that you can't hire people that are the exact same way as that, but with more experience? And he was right. And so for all of our executives, what we look for is, do they have that same scrappiness, that same hustle, but they've been through the ringer a little bit? And really like bringing in people that have more experience can be a godsend as long as they have that same level of hustle. Where it goes wrong is when you bring somebody in who has low flexibility, low intellectual honesty. This is really big. If you catch somebody saying something intellectually dishonest, especially in the first month or so, you should fire that person immediately. You should not wait to find out the rest because you'll probably have mismatched expectations. And then also making sure that they have that octane, that energy to get the work done and drive it through. And for older people that are more experienced, that doesn't mean asking them to work crazy hours. It means making sure that they're bringing the intensity and the focus to their craft.
So where were you finding some of these executives? Did you have your investors suggest them, or how did you, where did you find them?
Word of mouth is great, but also then usually recruiters and our investors. They've been awesome to help us. The big thing is like knowing when to ask. So I find that especially for early stage startups, people make a couple of different mistakes with their investors. The first is asking them too much. Your investor is not your babysitter. And frankly, they're not your friend. Your job is not to be going to them to say, hey, can you help me with this code push? Or what do you think about this feature? Your job is to go to them with the big stuff. And that's the other mistake, which is not asking anything. Your investors are there to help you. They are on your team. They have a vested interest in you succeeding. You should go to them and you should say, this is the thing I'm thinking about. And your job is to deliver on this. And a lot of investors will talk about value add. Hold them to that standard and do not relent. And remember that they work for you just the same that you work for them.
That's a refreshing take on investor relationships. Just to clarify, you don't hire your executives from the same kind of, unusual pools that you hire your junior employees.
Well, we have made those hires. I will say at some point in your career, it does get a little bit suspect if you have not managed to do something impressive at some point. We're open to those conversations always, but we haven't found that it works the same way for more experienced executive hires. What we do look for, though, is at one point, were they that way? Meaning, did they have this leap? And what we look for is ladder jumpers, meaning somebody who went from title A to B to C to D to E to F. They're great and they can be great in the role. But if you find somebody who went from title A to title C, that means that they probably did something pretty impressive between A and C and they jumped up that ladder really fast. And so finding those people, that's a great signal that they're really good.
It also sounds like people with just very diversified life experiences, hard pivots in life. I mean, I think those also make the best friends or just the most interesting people at a party in general are ones who kind of have wild backgrounds and you're like, you're doing what now?
Absolutely. And we got a lot of pushback from, not really our investors, but investors in general that were looking to say, you have to bring in more seasoned people and stop hiring just, people that you enjoy working with. You should not hire people you don't enjoy working with. And even if they're a great hire, if you don't like that person, don't hire them. First of all, it's bad on the culture. But second, you have to spend 12, 16, 18 hours a day sometimes with this person. Even if they're great at their job, if you don't like them, you're probably not going to get very far. Doesn't mean to hire your best friend, but it does mean that you should actually do the beer screen, which is, would you be able to get a beer with this person and not want to pull your hair out? I think on the flip side, part of what we measure is, would you want to get a beer with this person, but then equally, would you trust them to get your job done? Meaning, if you couldn't get your thing done and it was an emergency, would you trust that person in that emergency? And so you have to have both sides of the coin. A lot of people have one or the other, and we just don't find those people as interesting to work with.
Have you fired anyone? Has this philosophy ever, not worked out the way you hoped it would?
Yeah, we fire pretty darn fast. So I'll tell you, sort of an interesting stat is that if you are a consultant, you have, I think it's like a 99% chance of being fired in 3 weeks. And we have found that there are certain backgrounds that just don't mesh. Consultants tend to be one of them. That's not a broad judgment on all consultants. It's just the ones we've hired. No, we do tend to fire very sharply. The first sign is intellectual dishonesty. The first time that you ask somebody a question and they give you an answer that might not be outright dishonest, but when you dig in, they know isn't the truth, you should fire that person immediately. It will not get better. I've never seen it get better.
What's an example of that? I mean, are we talking purely work stuff or,
Yeah, it extends to everything, but a lot of it is, for example, if you say to somebody, hey, will this feature be done by this date? And they say, absolutely, it'll be done. That date rolls around, you go, hey, is the feature done? And they go, yeah, it's done. You go, okay. And then you sort of dig in a little bit and you realize, well, done means like, oh, it's not actually ready to be live, but they told you it's done to sort of avoid that awkward conversation. And then maybe you press them on it. You say, well, this doesn't seem done to me. What do you mean it's done? And then they get defensive and they start arguing why their definition of done is different than yours. And obviously you have to use your judgment, but what we see is like people that display that intellectual dishonesty where they'll cover their own failings by trying to point the finger elsewhere, deny that it happened or those other pieces. It just doesn't work to have them on your team.
So what were some of the other reasons that you might have fired people in the past?
As with the good comes the bad. So when you're hiring young, scrappy people with unique backgrounds, sometimes they're just not that good at their job. And we invest really heavily, but if you're not taking the feedback and turning it around and actually improving, then we'll let you go. The other thing that we say is we're outcomes oriented. So if you can deliver the outcome that you are hired to do, shipping a certain feature, marketing, delivering on MQLs, whatever it is, you can show up to the office when you want, you can leave when you want, you got to show up to Friday, all hands, but that's pretty much it. There's going to be really no rules. Well, you're not delivering outcomes. Our expectation is that you're going to be in the office 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. And it doesn't take very long usually at that pace to improve. We're not a 996 culture, but the idea is if we're going to invest in you, you have to give that time back. And the reason why we have that bar is partially because what you find out really quickly is some people actually don't care that much about being there. And putting them to that test of, if we're going to put time in because you're not hitting the bar for your job, then you should be putting the time back. And we'll be in the office right alongside you, but it's your job to show back that you care.
Wow. I mean, it's an intense policy, but I understand where you're coming from with that. But I'm wondering how you what is your team structure like so that you can have managers and a pulse on what is happening? I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of, pretty intense conversations that need to be happening, good communication, a good pulse on someone's kind of work-life balance, their output. I mean, there's many things that I'm assuming there's a level of managers that you work very, very closely with.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is we just talked about the ugly stuff, but the other stuff is we always lead with kindness. The first question is not you're bad at your job. It's, hey, is everything all right because you're not hitting these standards? We also lead with feedback. Everybody gets really clear deliverables, has real reasons and places that they can improve. It's not about some of the more punishing startup cultures I think we hear about. We hold a high bar and we say, if you want to be here and you're not hitting that bar, here's a path to staying here. But we also try to take care of people and we make sure that they have everything they need to succeed. If you need to take a day off, if you need to get rest, those are all things that we're incredibly accommodating around and we try to be proactive about. In terms of managers, generally, we try to have a really flat structure with one person being the DRI for the division. So that would be forward deployed engineering, post-sales, marketing, sales, and then engineering.
So, I mean, it sounds like there are, some, it's a pretty flat structure, but there's also some fluidity between the roles in the company. I'm curious sort of how you approach writing job descriptions, knowing that, you are also willing to listen to what this person wants and they might want to pivot to more technical roles.
Yeah. Part of the investment, we talk about loyalty being a two-way street. When people commit to being at Bland, what we commit to is if the role you're in doesn't fit, we're happy to find any other role in the business. And that can be from literally going from marketing to engineering if you want. We will always try to invest in somebody, especially if we think they really care about being here, even if they're maybe not the world-class best at what they do. When we think about writing a role, What we want to say is, how do we target the people who are out there that are like me and my co-founder Saban, who are young, who are scrappy, who really want to succeed, but don't have a clear path to the job or the future that they were thinking that they need. And so putting in there traits like, did you build something? So one of my best ever posts was just saying, DM me with something that you took from 0 to 1. It can be a club, it can be a project, anything that you want, and getting that example of like work that somebody's done. And what you find is there's people out there that have things that are not valuable on resumes, but are incredibly cool. And a real example I give is like beekeeping. We have an employee who's like nuts about beekeeping. And I hired them partially because their DM to me was like, I love bees. And it was all about bees. And I don't think that gets you very far when applying to big tech, maybe. But for us, what it just shows is that level of obsession, because that can be put onto anything usually.
I love that because I feel like, there's so many, when you go from high school to college in the US, you are expected to have so many hobbies, right? You have sports, you have extracurriculars so that you can get into college. Then you start applying for, jobs and nobody cares anymore. They're like, what did you do in school? What are your grades? What are you going to do? How are you going to help me? But then it's like, what if you just had the craziest, most interesting hobby and it was your whole life up until you, had to join the grind like the rest of us?
We probably should start checking transcripts at some point. But I found out recently, like 3 separate people, weirdly last week, that did not graduate college. I was like, oh, I had no idea. We really don't care because it doesn't actually affect your success here.
But so, when you're interviewing these people, when the job descriptions might be a little bit, flexible, I know you were talking about you really want to understand what brings them joy, but when most people approach a job interview, startup or not, they're a little nervous. They are putting on a certain sort of facade that they think you want to see in a job interview. How do you actually make them comfortable and open up to you in that, initial conversation?
Early days and even now, the way that I start every interview is by saying, I'm incredibly excited to get to know you because of these 3 things that I've looked at their resume, their LinkedIn beforehand. I'm really excited to learn more, define one of the questions that I have to ask them. And say, and my best outcome for this interview is that you're really excited about Bland. So I want to make sure that the time I spend asking you questions, you're also learning about Bland, because as long as you walk out of this saying, this is a really great place for me to work, I'll feel happy about this conversation. And setting the tone that way. A lot of startup founders, especially early days, they don't understand that they can be intimidating to be interviewed by, because they're like, hey, it's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people. Why would anyone be scared? I'm just me. But you have to recognize that this person is interviewing. They see you as the person that can, deny or accept them for a job. And making them feel comfortable and setting the tone for the interview is incredibly important.
Especially if they don't come from a tech background.
1,000%.
Yeah.
Because they're going to be nervous and thrown off. And just getting like that human connection is so hard to do for so many people. But if you can figure out your method of doing it, it really goes a long way.
Well, you mentioned you asked some pretty weird interview questions. Let's hear them.
Yes. So here's my other piece of advice for hiring. If your gut says something might not be quite right with a person, you'll feel this a lot probably as a startup founder. Ask questions twice. And what I mean by that is I will ask a question and I will wait 15 minutes and I'll ask the same version of that question again to see if their answer changes in between the first time and the second time I ask it. And if it's perfectly rehearsed, that's a red flag. That means that they've actually rehearsed the answer and somehow know what I'm asking and it's leaked on Reddit. But also, if they say something materially different, that's a huge red flag. It means they're just trying to pander to what you want to hear in the interview. What you want is somebody who's going to be authentically themselves and is okay with you saying, yes, you're the right fit to work here, and no, you're not the right fit based off that self. So some questions I ask. The first is, if you were hired here and you were fired 2 months later, why do you think that would be? And putting that to somebody, the only wrong answer, and hopefully nobody listens to this and then applies, the only wrong answer is one where they point the finger at everybody else. And what I'm looking for specifically is, does this person have the self-awareness to say, if I was hired somewhere and fired within 2 months, that there's a possibility that I could have been part of the problem? And so when they say something like, well, there's no resources and I didn't get a proper onboarding and then I wasn't able to do my job because of that, that's a really big red flag, because in a startup, you're probably not going to have proper onboarding. You're not going to have a lot of resources. And it doesn't make them a bad person, but it does give you a little hint about when they start failing, where is their mind going to go? And are they going to be the kind of person that fixes it? Or are they going to be the kind of person that sort of waits and is okay with it being broken?
And when you ask them the same question 10 minutes later, do you ever get stopped and be like, yo, you already asked me that?
I actually have. Like, One of my favorite things is when people challenge me in interviews. Sometimes it can be rude or jarring, but I've had a lot of people do it really respectfully. And I think people shouldn't be afraid to say, I see Bland does this, and honestly, I don't get this. Why are you guys doing this? Because it doesn't make sense to me because I would have done X, Y, Z. I think that's great. Another really weird question I ask people is, how much money do you want to have in 10 years? And you have to give me a specific amount. You can't say, I want to be wealthy, I want to be well off. How much liquid money do you want in 10 years from now? And you get really interesting answers that are actually a glimpse into what somebody wants. I've heard everything from $0, which was really interesting, all the way up to $1 billion, which is also really interesting. And because if somebody looks at you and says, I want $1 billion liquid in 10 years, that's a person who probably wants to start their own company, probably has different ambitions, and you need to pay attention to that. And if they say 0, that also tells you a lot about their ambitions. And it's not, again, a judgment of like one thing is a knockout or how much money they want. It just tells you actually a lot about what they expect from themselves. And then that sets the standard. And sort of the last question I recommend everybody ask. In an interview, you should say, how do I earn your respect every single day if you were to work here? And you learn a lot about good leadership, but you also learn, if that person joins, exactly how you can make sure that they're successful and they feel welcome at your company.
But speaking of learning about good leadership, I have to ask, where did you learn all of these tips and advice? Because it seems like you have a very sort of, clear and structured hiring philosophy and interviewing philosophy. And I think it's very interesting. I'm wondering, you're a first-time founder. Okay. So where did you kind of get all this from?
YC's been great. I'd like to give credit to my parents, mom and dad. I always have to. I think they did a really good job teaching me about how to treat people and how to have both firmness but kindness at the same exact time. But I think really like what you don't see is all the scars to get to this point, and we're still learning. There's so much that we're learning, but we had bad interviews and we had bad candidate experiences, and we did things that we look back and we said we could have done that way better. And I think that the best founders, your job is never to let yourself obsess on the good. Every once in a while, celebrate the wins. But the thing that me and my co-founder do that I think keeps us going and keeps us growing at this clip is we literally just sit down and say the ugliest possible things that we are thinking at that moment about the business, about each other, about, not in an insulting way, but here's what we can do better. And just constantly questioning and asking. It's usually way more obvious when you do that bit by bit what's going wrong.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a good idea. We're talking a lot about sort of co-founder therapy on this season of Build Modes. It sounds like that's your guys' version of it. And, you got to get it off your chest. You can't let it fester. But what is sort of, I want to hear maybe the best and the worst piece of advice you've ever received from mentors or whoever about building your team.
Best advice we ever got was, this was right after YC, maybe a month or two after. Had no money, and we were looking at hiring this person from a big tech company who had done something really impressive with voice and something that a lot of people use every single day. And he was like really interested in working with us, and we were going to give him a job offer. And we went and we talked to the YC partners about like, how do we hire this person and what comp is fair? And it was like an office hour style thing. And I remember they took us on a walk, and it was Michael, Gary, and then Dave, I believe. And we were walking around the YC office. We had never done a walk together. I think they were just tired of like sitting all day. And they're hearing everything that they said, and they go, why on earth would this person want to work for you? Like, what? Like, you guys are like, have nothing. Like, there's no way this person wants to work for you. It's like, what are you saying? He's like, to be really clear, like, why would they join a startup that has no traction when they have this great resume? You shouldn't hire this person. And I said, but how on earth are we going to learn how to do XYZ thing? And Michael looked at me and said, well, what if you just did it yourself? And I was like, but then how would I have to learn it? He goes, I don't know, but then you would learn it. And what he was right about was like, first is don't hire somebody for a job you haven't done yourself. That is terrible, terrible practice. If you were thinking about hiring somebody, you as a founder have to go do that job. Even if you don't do a great job of it, you need to know what it is, because you can never measure somebody on a job you haven't done to some degree. And the second thing is be really skeptical. People will come out of the woodwork with these great sounding resumes. They'll come and look at your startup and sort of doing this gut check of saying like, hey, this person that's worked at a Fortune 500 company or has this long and great career experience, why would they take an equity and a comp package that highly likely would end up way, way lower? And sometimes it's truly mission driven, but a lot of times there's something going on that you don't see. And so being really skeptical is just a great practice for hiring. And then making sure that you're not hiring until you've done it yourself.
I'm curious, like, what the motivation would be for leaving their big tech job and joining the startup that is sort of, fuzzy or, suspicious. Like, what would be the worst case scenario there?
What the worst case scenario is they don't actually know what they're getting them. Well, the worst case scenario is like fraud. But assuming that that's not actually it, it's that they don't know what they're getting themselves into. And they have this idea of a startup, or they have a romanticized idea of a startup, or they're talking to you and they're talking to other people, or they're going to show up and waste your time. Because all you really get early stage is time. You have to go, go, go. And I like to say pre-seed is measured in days, seed is measured in weeks, Series A is measured in months, and Series B is measured in quarters. And as a pre-seed company, your unit of time is a day. How much are you getting done in a day? So if you screw around and waste 2 weeks trying to hire somebody from big tech, going back and forth on negotiations, you've burned already too much time.
I'm no math whiz, but I think pre-seed to Series B in 10 months, you already surpassed your own algorithm there. How did you?
Well, we're figuring out what the next.
My gosh. I want to talk about compensation for a second because, again, with all of these hires with unconventional backgrounds, maybe no work experience, maybe no track record, sort of how do you gauge how much they are, you should be compensating them versus how much they might negotiate for? Just what has been your experience?
One, pay fair is my best advice. And paying fair means not paying over the top and not paying under. There were a lot of employees that we hired that we could have paid way less than we actually did. For our BDRs, we pay above market and we make sure that all of them can make 6 figures every year, which is relatively rare for a BDR role. For us, we want to make sure that pay aligns with the work and the value. A lot of founders make the mistake of overpaying. Sam Altman said this: you only get 2 levers. You get cash and you get equity. And those are your 2 motivators for any given employee at the base level. And if you're not thinking about those as a scarce resource that you can only give out so much, you're thinking wrong. So when you think about an employee pay, don't factor in, hey, this is what they're making. Factor in, how could I give them a $5,000 raise for every month for the next year to make sure that they're really excited about the work, and what would they be at? The other thing is say no a lot. As a founder, I really recommend you'll have people come in, especially these days in this market, and say, I want to make $200,000 a year. If you are a pre-seed or a seed company, you can say, no, we can't afford that. You don't have to capitulate, and you're allowed to set your bands. And you may lose out on people, but truthfully, if somebody leaves to go to a different company over 20 or 30K, you might not have wanted that person. We always say to candidates, if comp ends up being the deciding factor, you should not choose us. That being said, flex, be fair, make sure that the comp works for them, get creative, ask them what matters. We have a lot of employees who will come in and they need to move to San Francisco, or they have one-off life expenses, and we can make that work. Or we can say, hey, the company can have these policies or give you these things outside of just base comp that make sure that you're valued. Don't blow up your pay scales. Make sure that people are relatively in the same area, and really just be mindful that when you issue a job offer, you can never lower somebody's salary. And so start in a place where you feel comfortable and that you know that you can continue to incentivize them.
Yeah, I mean, I like this idea of like consistent raises. I feel like that would keep, especially a young person, very motivated in their job, as opposed to coming in with these high salaries. Again, if you're not, that's why I asked the question, if you're not hiring necessarily people with ridiculous pedigrees that can come in and demand ridiculous salaries to match.
And if you get into a negotiation that becomes prolonged, my advice is to cut it off. For me, I'll do about 2 or 3 turns of a negotiation before it's over. And the number one thing is we pulled job offers, actually a fair amount. I want to say over 10 with candidates, because they'll come in, they'll say a number. And if we say, okay, we can hit that number for you, and they'll go, actually, I want this. If somebody says their number and then they renege on it, or they go back on their word at all, even the slightest in negotiation, you should pull the job offer immediately. They're telling you exactly who they are in that moment. Not to say that you shouldn't respect great negotiators, but don't respect intellectual dishonesty. And the negotiation process can be really revealing about how people behave.
And what about the equity component in all of this?
First, explain the equity. I didn't realize this, but a lot of people have no idea what equity actually means. In fact, some of our early guys still don't fully grasp, I think, how much they have. And I try to make sure that they know and are being responsible. But for early employees, you should sit them down and put together a spreadsheet of, here's what your equity is worth today. Here's what it could be worth at these valuations. And explain to them, here's how you buy that equity. Here's how you sell that equity. Here's what liquidity would look like for a secondary round or something else. Explain the equity. And the second piece is offer the employee control over how they want to do it. So we usually do a sliding scale where we'll say, hey, 20% of your pay in either direction can be decided by you, meaning at a 4-to-1 ratio, for every dollar of salary, you get $4 of equity. What do you care about more? So if you would rather make $160K and have, $80K additional than $180, we can do that for you.
I think that's a good thing to give people options because you never know where they're at in life in this exact point and how urgent it is.
Exactly.
Are you hiring AI at all? I specifically asked because it sounds like you're putting a lot of eggs in the BDR basket, which is one of the roles quickly being, replaced by AI these days.
Yeah, we burn through an enormous amount of Claude Code tokens, as I'm sure everybody else does. I encourage people to use AI tools all the time, but we try to actually scope what they can use because, one, you don't want private data being leaked. So for example, you can't directly connect our GitHub to any of the AI tools, especially because we work with really secure companies like these big financial institutions who you just can't have that exposure and that access. But we encourage everybody to use AI tools. Our BDRs are constantly using them. I think it's slowed down our pace of hiring. For the size of company and the revenue that we're at, which is decently above 8 figures, I don't think that we should be as small as we are. And I think using AI tools smartly has enabled that. But what we make sure is AI does not replace human accountability. If you put a document together and it was written by AI, that's fine. But if I read it and there's something in there, you are responsible for whatever is in there. And making sure that don't let AI slop infiltrate your company, it's not acceptable.
I'm wondering if you have seen other early stage founders, your peers, who are sort of, having similar hiring philosophies of hiring from, diversified talent pools, or if that's something you would recommend, or if this is really, almost a not so secret sauce of yours.
Ooh, I recommend every founder to look for diverse candidates for every single role. I think diversity is exceptionally important, but I think that the only thing you don't want any diversity on is values. And what you should make sure is that you find people that come from every walk of life, all spectrums of experience, but make sure they share the exact same values as you. What do they care about and what do you care about? Is ambition a value that you share? Is hard work a value that you share? Do they care about the problem? Do you think that they'll get excited? I think that for the most part, honestly, early stage startup founders should go with their gut, and everybody finds their own pattern of hiring that works. Some people like to invest really deeply in employees, and some people are, let's do a 1-week work trial and fire fast. And actually, both of those are a different form of kindness and or not kindness. And I think you just have to find what works for you. I will say, I do think one of the things that we are the best at is finding this undiscovered hidden gem talent. And I do think it is really hard to scale it. And so training your team for how to look for those people and figuring out what characteristics mesh with your company, it's really hard, but it's worthwhile if you can.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, very interesting and a successful team that you've built. I, would love to hang out with this team. It sounds like some characters, some great stories around that table. I can only imagine that, it's a fun environment to work in. So otherwise, it's been lovely chatting with you. I think there's so many, nuggets of insight for other founders listening. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
Build Mode is a TechCrunch podcast. Each episode is produced and edited by Maggie Nye and hosted by me, Isabelle Johannessen. Our art and design is also by Maggie Nye. A big thanks to Morgan Little, who leads our audience development, the Foundry and Cheddar video teams, and most of all to you, the builders, and everyone else in the wider startup community. We'll see you back here next time.